He boarded the flight with nothing but a baby on his chest and quiet strength in his eyes. No assistant, no diamond watch, just a father and a seat in first class. But what happened next made the cabin go silent. Why did the senior flight attendant suddenly accuse him of fraud? Why did strangers assume a black man couldn't belong in that seat, especially with a baby in his arms? And what if the man they tried to humiliate had the power to change the entire airline industry? This isn't just a story about injustice at 30,000 feet. It's about presence, about grace under pressure, about what happens when one man refuses to shrink. You're about to hear the powerful story of Isaiah Coleman, a single dad, a grieving husband, and a quiet force that made the sky safer for us all. If you believe dignity should fly with every passenger, hit like, share this story, and subscribe to our channel, because the seat you pay for should never depend on the color of your skin. Now, lean in. Let the story begin. Isaiah Coleman had never liked airports, not because they were chaotic or crowded though they always were, but because they demanded a kind of public stillness he had never mastered, a stillness that looked like ease on others. Travelers who seemed to belong, couples sipping coffee, executives typing confidently at gates, children bouncing ahead of two-parent households like wind-up toys. Isaiah didn't belong here, not in the way the world expected him to. He stood near Gate C-12 at Seattle-Tacoma International, bouncing gently on the balls of his feet. The baby carrier strapped across his chest rose and fell with each careful breath. Inside it, his 8-month-old son, Noah, slept with his cheek pressed into Isaiah's hoodie. A soft smudge of drool darkened the fabric, and Isaiah didn't mind at all. Every movement he made was calculated quiet enough not to wake Noah, slow enough not to attract attention, alert enough to track the gate screen, the boarding line, and the time. Aurora Skyways flight AS-318 to Zurich, departing in 40 minutes. He adjusted the strap of the baby bag over his shoulder and glanced down at Noah. The boy had Ava's nose, a gentle slope that looked like it belonged on someone dreaming of the ocean, and the curls, tight spirals that refused to be tamed by baby lotion or tiny brushes. Isaiah had tried. "You're doing great," he whispered to the sleeping child. "We're almost there." Noah stirred but didn't wake. Isaiah exhaled slowly. This wasn't a vacation. Not for him. The trip was something he'd promised his late wife, Ava, in a hospital room that had smelled like antiseptic and panic. She had wanted Noah to meet her grandmother, an artist who lived just outside Zurich, before her mind gave way to the fog of dementia. Ava never got to make that journey. Postpartum complications had stolen her breath, her voice, her future just 3 days after bringing Noah into the world. And now it was Isaiah's job to deliver the memory of her, to carry their child across an ocean, to stand in the gap she left behind. He had planned every detail, packed formula, diapers, pacifiers, change of clothes for both of them. He'd watched 3 hours of YouTube videos on flying with infants and memorized every FAA guideline for baby carriers, bassinets, and milk temperature, prepared for everything, except what couldn't be predicted. He scanned the faces around him, travelers ignoring him, mostly, some glancing briefly and then looking away. But one man had paused just long enough. A white guy in a Patagonia jacket and earbuds, mid-30s, sipping a $7 coffee. His gaze landed on Isaiah, flicked to the baby, then to the premium economy section on the digital screen. And then, that subtle shift, that near imperceptible raising of brows, a microscopic tightening of the lips, not overt, not cruel, just questioned. Isaiah was used to it. A tall black man, traveling solo with a biracial baby in an ergonomic carrier, standing near the premium gate. He could feel it, the assumptions, and so, like he always did, Isaiah did nothing, no scowl, no shift in posture, no pointed reply. He simply stayed soft, still, steady. When boarding was called, Isaiah waited for his group. Group 2, Premium Economy. Not quite business, but more legroom. Just enough space to hold his grief and his baby at once. Passengers in Group 2. You may now board through Lane B. He stepped forward, handing over his phone screen to the gate agent, a woman with a sharp ponytail and tired eyes. "Thank you." "Mr. Coleman," she said, glancing briefly at Noah. "Have a peaceful flight." "I hope so," Isaiah replied with a quiet smile. The jet bridge smelled like metal and recycled air. He moved slowly, swaying slightly, keeping Noah asleep. The motion helped. It reminded him of when Noah was first born and wouldn't stop crying unless he walked the living room in loops, whispering lullabies Ava had once sung. At the aircraft door stood 2 flight attendants. One was young, early 20s, with soft brown hair tucked behind his ear and a warm smile that tried its best not to look nervous. His name tag read Jared. The other was a woman in her early 50s, platinum blonde bun pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her face. Her name tag, Harper. Jared waved at Noah gently. "Hey there, buddy," he said softly. Isaiah nodded in thanks. Harper, however, said nothing at first. Then she spoke. "Sir, that bag will need to be stowed in the overhead or completely under the seat. Aisle needs to stay clear." Her voice was crisp, clipped, polite, but distant. "Understood," Isaiah replied. Tone even. "I'll take care of it." He didn't miss the pause in her gaze. The half-second longer it took her to look away, the assessing glance not at his baby, but at him. He moved into the cabin, seat 15C, aisle, premium economy, bulkhead row, extra space for the bassinet he'd requested. He slid the diaper bag under the seat, a tight fit, but manageable, then, with practiced hands, he unclipped Noah from the carrier, eased him into the airline-provided bassinet, and sat down. Noah stirred, but didn't cry. Isaiah leaned back, his muscles uncoiling 1 inch at a time. "Beautiful boy," came a voice beside him. He turned. An elderly woman in the window seat, short silver hair and soft eyes, smiled at him. How old, she asked. 8 months, Isaiah answered. And traveling like a pro, she whispered. "My name's Elena." "Isaiah," he said, returning her smile. "And this is Noah." "Well, Noah," she said gently, reaching a careful hand toward the bassinet, but not touching. "You're going to see the Alps. What an adventure." Isaiah didn't speak for a moment. He let her words land gently, like snow. He didn't want to explain that this wasn't an adventure. This was a pilgrimage, a promise. But there wasn't time to say more, because Harper had entered the cabin, clipboard in hand, moving through rows with surgical precision. She stopped at Isaiah's row. "Sir," she said sharply, "the seat next to you must remain clear. The bag you've placed there needs to be moved." Isaiah looked at the seat. "It's empty," he said calmly. "There's no passenger assigned. I checked before boarding. The flight is full," she snapped. "That seat may be filled later. FAA regulations require that all items be stowed." He nodded once, slowly, then bent forward and adjusted the bag. pushing it under the seat next to his own. The zipper scraped against the tray hinge. It was a snug, awkward fit. Harper watched him do it, then walked away. Elena leaned slightly toward him. "Some people forget what it's like to travel with heart," she whispered. Isaiah gave a tight smile. "I've got thick skin," he said quietly. But already, inside, something small was unraveling, and this flight had only just begun. Isaiah had just begun to relax when he felt a change in the cabin's rhythm. It was something subtle, the kind of thing you only notice if you've spent years walking on invisible eggshells. The flight attendants were moving with the crisp energy that signaled final boarding. Passengers filtered in, row by row. Some jostled bags. Others huffed about overhead space. Babies cried. Couples argued softly about seat numbers. All normal. But Harper Linwood had returned. This time she stopped just past his row and began glancing at seat tags on her clipboard. Her eyes passed over him without acknowledgement, but her mouth pressed into a thinner line. Isaiah sat back in his seat, one hand resting protectively on Noah's bassinet. The baby still slept, breathing in soft huffs, his tiny fists curled like seashells. "Sir," Harper said suddenly, pivoting back to face him. "Is this your assigned seat?" Isaiah blinked once. "Yes," he replied, his voice even. 15C, Premium Economy, confirmed online and again at the gate. She stared for a beat too long, then glanced at her tablet and back again, and the infant bassinet requested in advance. He said, "Cleared by customer service last week. I have the confirmation if you need it." She didn't ask to see it. Instead, she gave him a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Of course," she said, and turned to move away. Isaiah exhaled slowly. It hadn't been a full confrontation, more like a warning shot. One of those moments where power pressed against you in a way that wasn't loud, but was absolutely unmistakable. Elena, sitting by the window, leaned toward him again. "You handled that well," she said softly. He nodded but didn't speak. His mind was already elsewhere, playing out different versions of how this flight could go. 9.5 hours left. Zurich was a long way off. 2 rows back. A child screamed, and Harper veered quickly toward the sound. Jared, the younger flight attendant, appeared a few minutes later. He approached quietly, his smile gentle and real. "Hey," he said, crouching slightly so his voice wouldn't carry. "Just wanted to check in." Everything good so far. Isaiah looked at him for a long second, trying to read the intention behind the kindness. "Yes. Thanks," he said. "We're okay." Jared looked at Noah and smiled wider. "He's a good traveler. Most kids are squirming before pushback." "I've been lucky," Isaiah said, watching his son sleep. "He likes the motion. Same with car rides." Jared nodded. "My niece was like that. Loved the car but hated the stroller. Babies are opinionated." Isaiah let out a small laugh. "That they are." Then Jared reached into his pocket and pulled out a tiny fabric airplane rattle. "It's clean," he said quickly. "Sanitized this morning. For Noah, if he wakes up and needs a distraction." Isaiah hesitated, and then took it with a quiet, "Thank you." Jared nodded and walked away. Elena smiled as she watched him go. "You can always tell the ones who lead with heart," she murmured. Isaiah turned the rattle in his hand. Noah stirred then, just slightly. A small grunt and the twitch of a foot. But he settled again. The cabin lights dimmed. The safety demonstration began. Harper took her place in the aisle, voice sharp and clear as she read through the script. Isaiah watched her with a strange calm. Her poise, her tone, her confidence, none of it surprised him. He had met Harpers before. He'd met them in elevators where he was asked if he belonged, in banks where he was told to wait just one moment while others were helped, at parks, at schools, at stores, places where authority didn't wear a badge but wore something far more dangerous subtlety. He knew the script. He just hadn't expected to see it played out mid-air. 10 minutes after takeoff, Noah woke. At first, it was just a soft coo, a baby stretching and adjusting to the change in pressure. Isaiah reached for a bottle, pre-filled with warm water, and added formula powder with practiced ease. As he shook the bottle gently, Harper appeared again. "That's not allowed during takeoff," she said sharply. "We're already at cruising altitude," Isaiah replied, keeping his tone neutral. "I didn't give the all clear yet. I waited for the seatbelt sign to go off," he said calmly, "and I'm making a bottle." He's about to cry. She stared for a moment, too long again, then walked off without another word. Isaiah sighed. Noah whined, not quite a cry, but the preamble to one, a slow building, squirming discomfort. Isaiah cradled him and offered the bottle, but Noah turned his head away, still restless. "Temperature," he muttered, "too cool." He stood to walk toward the galley to ask for a cup of hot water. Harper met him before he got 2 steps. "You need to stay seated," she said. "I just need a small cup of hot water," he explained. "To warm the bottle." "Not now," she snapped. "Service hasn't begun. Please return to your seat." He looked at her, quietly, fully. Something in that stare made Harper shift. "I'll bring it when I can," she added curtly. He returned to his seat, sat, waited. 5 minutes passed, then 10, still no water. Noah began to fuss, a low whine that escalated in waves. He kicked his legs and arched his back. The bottle, too cool, sat useless in Isaiah's hand. The crying began. A few passengers turned their heads, others tried not to. Elena leaned in gently, offering a packet of tissues and a look of soft solidarity. Isaiah bounced Noah in his arms, whispered, rocked, but the crying grew louder, and then Harper returned. "Sir," she said sharply, "you're disturbing the cabin. Other passengers are trying to rest." Isaiah turned toward her, voice low and contained. "I asked for hot water 20 minutes ago, and I told you we were not in service mode yet." "This is a baby," he said, still cradling Noah. "He doesn't understand service mode. We are not required to accommodate every personal request during non-service periods." Isaiah stared at her. "It's not personal. It's basic humanity." Harper's eyes narrowed. "Watch your tone." Isaiah breathed in and out. He glanced at Jared, who stood halfway down the aisle, watching, uncertain. The younger man caught his eye, then quietly walked to the galley. 30 seconds later, he returned with a cup. He placed it gently on Isaiah's tray table and said nothing. Harper stared at him, livid. "Jared," she said coldly, "we'll talk later." Isaiah warmed the bottle, tested it, then offered it to Noah. His son took it instantly, sucking in relief. The crying faded. Isaiah held him close and whispered, "You're okay. Buddy, I got you." Elena leaned forward again, voice low. "They treat mothers like saints when they fly alone," she said, "but they treat fathers, especially black fathers, like anomalies." Isaiah didn't respond. He just stared down at his son and thought of Ava. of the way she used to press her forehead to his and whisper, "You were born patient, but even patience has edges." He felt those edges now, felt them fray, and this flight was only just beginning. The bottle was almost empty now, and Noah had begun to drift again. A soft sigh fluttering from his tiny lips as sleep returned to him. Isaiah brushed a fingertip across his son's curls, letting the motion ground him. The warmth of Noah's skin reminded him of what mattered, what was real. But the tension in his shoulders hadn't eased. Not really. He could still feel Harper's words clawing at him like static. Not loud, not explosive, but sharp enough to wound in quiet places. It wasn't about the bottle. It never was. It was about being questioned, dismissed, controlled. It was the familiarity of it that exhausted him most. Harper didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She used rules like a scalpel. Elena had gone silent beside him, watching Isaiah with something like protective sadness. She hadn't spoken since the last exchange, just offered a gentle presence. The kind some people learn only after living long enough to see the same story repeat in new faces. Isaiah closed his eyes for a moment, letting the hum of the engine fill the space inside his chest. He remembered Ava's voice again, not in a sentence, but in a look, the way she used to reach for his hand when she knew he was swallowing his anger. She'd once told him, "They'll try to make you small. Don't help them do it." He opened his eyes and caught Jared walking down the aisle, refilling water for passengers. The younger man gave him a quick, respectful nod. That one gesture, the subtle act of acknowledgement, meant more than Jared probably knew. Isaiah turned and glanced around the cabin. Most passengers had settled. A few were watching movies. Others flipped through magazines or scrolled on their phones. But one man, seated diagonally behind Isaiah, was watching him intently. He was mid-50s, clean-cut, with a navy blazer and silver hair combed neatly back. When Isaiah's eyes met his, the man didn't look away. He smiled, but it wasn't warm, more like the smile of someone who had already decided who you were and was just waiting to be proven right. Isaiah turned back forward. He didn't need trouble from two directions. Another hour passed. Turbulence rocked the cabin gently, waking Noah for a brief moment, but Isaiah held him close, humming softly. The baby settled again, cheek pressed into his father's chest. Jared approached once more, this time kneeling slightly beside the aisle to avoid towering over him. "Hey, Mr. Coleman," he said in a low voice. "We'll be starting meal service soon. I wanted to check if you'd like your meal warmed first so you can eat while the baby's sleeping." Isaiah blinked. That simple act of foresight offering dignity, not just assistance, caught him off guard. "Yes," Isaiah said, voice quieter than before. "Thank you. That would be great." Jared smiled and moved back toward the galley, but 30 seconds later, Harper appeared again. "Is there a problem here?" she asked Jared in a tone that wasn't loud, but sharp enough to cut steel. Jared looked surprised. "No, I was just, meal service follows protocol." Harper interrupted. "We don't provide early meals for individual passengers." Isaiah heard it all, heard it clearly, even though it wasn't said to him. It was clearly about him. He turned in his seat. He offered. "I didn't ask." "That's not the issue," Harper said without meeting his eyes. "We follow uniform procedures." Isaiah inhaled slowly through his nose, then let it out. "Harper," Elena said gently from the window seat. "The man is traveling alone with a baby?" A little flexibility wouldn't hurt anyone. I appreciate your opinion, ma'am, Harper said, tone clipped, but I'm following training. Isaiah sat back. He didn't want a scene. He didn't want to escalate, but he was beginning to feel the slow burn beneath his ribs that Ava used to warn him about. There's a line between patience and self-erasure, she once said. Don't cross it just to keep other people comfortable. He said nothing. He simply reached into the bag at his feet, pulled out a granola bar, and ate that instead. Jared passed a quiet glance his way a few minutes later and mouthed, "I'm sorry." Isaiah nodded once. He knew Jared wasn't the problem, but kindness wasn't always enough to outweigh structure, especially when that structure was built on assumptions. Meal service began soon after. Trays clinked, carts rolled, and the cabin filled with the soft scent of reheated pasta and chicken. Jared delivered Isaiah's tray without a word, placing it carefully on his table. Harper followed 2 carts behind, stiff and precise. Isaiah ate with one hand, cradling Noah with the other. The baby nestled against his chest. He didn't touch the drink, didn't trust what might be done or undone when he wasn't looking. He was tired, but not surprised. 2 hours later, the cabin dimmed again, lights off, silence settling, people sleeping. Isaiah didn't sleep. Instead, he looked out into the black stretch of sky beyond the tiny oval window. The stars were barely visible, just faint pinpricks against the cold, empty dark. He thought about his brother then, Caleb, CEO of Highline Air. Not this airline Aurora Skyways, but the 3rd largest in the U.S. They weren't close, not really. Caleb lived on the East Coast now, had worked his way up from air traffic controller to regional operations chief to boardroom darling. Their relationship had always been complicated. Caleb was sharp, strategic, and sometimes cold. But he also didn't play when it came to family. And Isaiah knew if things ever really crossed a line, he could call him. He'd only done it once before, 2 years ago, when a hospital administrator refused to let Isaiah into Ava's post-op room because he didn't match the family contact profile. Caleb had made a single call. 1 hour later, the hospital's legal team called Isaiah with an apology. He didn't like using that power, didn't want to need it, but the world didn't always let him choose. And as he watched Harper walk by again, glancing down at him like he'd misplaced something precious and she couldn't quite decide whether to return it or report it, Isaiah felt something shift inside him, a question forming. How much was he willing to endure to keep this flight peaceful, and what was the cost of his silence? Noah stirred again, soft and warm in his arms. Isaiah pressed his lips to the top of his son's head and whispered into the quiet, "You're not going to grow up thinking this is normal." He didn't realize Elena had heard him until she placed her hand gently on his wrist. "You're a good father," she said quietly. He looked at her, unsure how to receive it. "It's not about perfection," she added. "It's about presence. And you're here." He nodded, swallowing hard. "Thank you," he said. But the edges inside him continued to fray, and Zurich was still 6 hours away. It was just after midnight when the baby finally slipped into deeper sleep. Isaiah sat motionless, cradling Noah's soft weight against his chest, his arm half asleep but his mind wide awake. The cabin was dark now, save for a few reading lights and the faint glow from screens. A hush had settled one Isaiah usually welcomed, but tonight it only amplified the sound of thoughts knocking around inside his head. He hadn't eaten properly. The tray of half-finished pasta still sat cold and ignored on the edge of his tray table, His appetite had vanished somewhere between Harper's last warning and Jared's quiet apology. Isaiah shifted slightly in his seat to stretch his leg. That's when he noticed the man in 17A again. The man was still watching him. Not obviously, not continuously, but in that sideways, intermittent way that told you he didn't think you deserved to be where you were. Isaiah turned away and pressed his cheek gently to Noah's head. He closed his eyes, breathed. A few minutes later, the silence broke. "Excuse me, flight attendant." The voice came from 17A. Harper appeared quickly, like she'd been expecting the summons. "Yes, Mr. Davidson. I was just wondering," the man said, his voice too smooth. "Is there any way I might be moved up to that front row seat?" Isaiah's eyes opened. He didn't move, but he listened. Harper followed the man's gaze straight to 15C, Isaiah's seat. "Unfortunately," she replied carefully, "that seat is assigned." Mr. Davidson gave a short, rehearsed laugh. "I'm aware, but I thought since I'm platinum and he's economy that there might be some discretion." Isaiah said nothing. Not yet. Harper didn't respond at first. Her eyes flicked from Davidson back to Isaiah, then back again. "I'll check with the cabin supervisor," she said finally. She walked off briskly. Davidson leaned back in his seat, crossing his legs, his expression unreadable in the dim light. Isaiah stared at the back of the seat in front of him, something churning in his chest. He'd seen this play out before in boardrooms, in airports, in restaurants where someone assumed a reservation couldn't possibly belong to him. But on a plane, 30,000 feet in the air with his baby in his arms, there was nowhere to walk away to. 5 minutes later, Harper returned. "I've spoken with the cabin supervisor," she said, voice polite but cool. "Unfortunately, we're unable to make any seat changes at this time." Davidson didn't protest, just nodded and smiled again. "Appreciate you checking." But when Harper passed Isaiah's row, her eyes lingered on him, not kind, not apologetic, more like he was the cause of an unresolved inconvenience. Isaiah held her gaze, calm but unblinking. She moved on without a word. Elena stirred beside him and turned to whisper, "I saw the whole thing." Isaiah gave a tight smile. "Of course you did." She glanced toward Davidson, then back. "That man would have gladly taken your seat, your baby, and your bottle be damned." Isaiah nodded. "Privilege doesn't ask. It expects." They sat in silence a while. Then Elena added softly, "You're handling this with more grace than I would." He shrugged slightly. "It's not grace, it's training." Another hour passed. The quiet of the cabin deepened. Jared came by with a blanket and tucked it over Noah without waking him. He mouthed, "Hang in there," and walked on. Isaiah felt something shift, something tired and ancient in his bones. He leaned his head back, trying to sleep, but just as he began to drift, a hand shook his shoulder. "Sir," came Harper's voice, sharp again. "Sir, I need you to sit upright." Isaiah jerked awake, startled. Noah whimpered but didn't cry. "I'm upright," Isaiah muttered, trying to orient himself. "You're leaning too far into the aisle. It's a safety concern." "I was asleep," he said. "The seat reclines." She didn't move. "You'll need to adjust yourself or I'll have to escalate this." That word again, escalate. It wasn't about the aisle. It wasn't about safety. It was about power, the kind that lived in tone, not policy. Isaiah straightened his back, adjusted the blanket over Noah, and nodded. "Fine." Harper walked away, but the damage was done. Isaiah no longer felt safe, not physically, but emotionally. His presence was being chipped away, piece by quiet piece. He pulled his phone from the diaper bag, flicked off airplane mode for a moment, and opened a note app. Then he began to type. Each word felt heavier than the last. "Caleb, if you're awake, I need a favor." He stared at the message, didn't send it, yet instead he put the phone away again. Then he whispered to his son, still warm and breathing against him, "I shouldn't have to call your uncle for this, but somewhere deep down, he knew the time was coming." Another half hour passed. The plane hit a patch of turbulence. Oxygen masks didn't drop, but passengers jolted awake. Someone up front spilled wine and cursed. A child whimpered. Noah stirred. Isaiah bounced him gently, whispering reassurances. Then, unexpectedly, Harper returned. This time she carried something in her hand, a complaint form. "We've had a few reports of disruption in this section," she said crisply. "I'd like you to review and sign this so we can log the incident." Isaiah stared at the paper, the pen she extended toward him. The gall it took to stand there with a face like she was doing him a favor. "What incident?" he asked. "You've been repeatedly out of compliance with seatbelt policies and service expectations. You mean I tried to warm a bottle and feed my son? You've made requests outside of designated times and created an unsafe environment." Isaiah didn't raise his voice, didn't swear, didn't stand. He just said, very quietly, "I'm not signing anything." Harper's expression didn't change. "I'll make a note of your refusal," she said, and turned. Isaiah sat still for a long moment, heart pounding. He was a quiet man, a steady man. But this wasn't about him anymore. It was about what message he was allowing Noah to absorb, what memory his son might carry someday without even knowing why. Isaiah reached for his phone again. This time, he typed with purpose. "Caleb, I didn't want to bother you, but I think I need you on this." He hit send, then leaned back into his seat and waited. Isaiah didn't expect a reply right away. It was the middle of the night on the East Coast. Caleb usually silenced his phone past midnight. But Isaiah also knew his brother, knew the way Caleb ran his life like a control tower, every alert categorized, every buzz accounted for. 10 minutes after sending the message, his phone vibrated quietly. A text appeared. "Caleb, what's going on? Are you safe? Isaiah, I'm fine. But there's a situation, long flight, baby's with me, being targeted by a flight attendant. It's escalating. She just tried to get me to sign an incident report. I refused. Caleb, airline name, flight number, full details, now." Isaiah exhaled. He hadn't wanted it to come to this, but here he was, typing with one hand while his son dozed against his shoulder, unaware of the subtle storm brewing in the cabin. He typed out everything flight number, gate of departure, airline name Aurora Skyways. He included Harper Linwood's name and described the moments that stood out most: the bottle incident, the refusal of the early meal, the unnecessary form, and Davidson's quiet attempt to claim his seat. He hit send, then waited, and while he waited, Harper returned again, almost like she could sense that something had shifted. "Mr. Coleman," she began, standing just beside his row, voice dipped in a rehearsed civility that rang hollow. "I'd like to offer you a coffee on the house to help settle things." Isaiah looked up at her. Her hands were empty. There was no coffee, no tray. He realized it wasn't an offer, it was a test. She wanted to record a gracious moment in her log, something to counteract her own actions if this ever reached higher eyes. "No, thank you," he said, calm, steady. Her eyes tightened for a fraction of a second. Then she turned. He didn't expect her to return again, but she did. 5 minutes later, with another printed form. "Since you've refused to sign the prior document," she said, "I need to inform you that your conduct will be noted and reviewed by security personnel upon arrival in Zurich." Elena, beside him, sat bolt upright. "Are you threatening to have him detained?" Harper didn't look at her. "This is standard protocol." "No, it isn't," Elena snapped, voice rising slightly. "I've flown internationally for 40 years. I've never seen a man asked to sign a misconduct report because he asked to feed his child. You're escalating something that shouldn't have begun in the first place." Other passengers began to glance toward them now. A few phones quietly lifted. People were filming. "I don't want a scene," Isaiah said softly, but Harper heard the edge in his voice. "You're the only one creating one," she replied. That was the moment Isaiah looked her square in the eyes and said, very quietly, "You need to stop." Harper's mouth opened slightly, as if surprised he'd dare use a tone approaching authority. But before she could speak again, another voice cut through the cabin. "Excuse me," said Jared, hurrying toward them, tablet in hand. "Mr. Coleman, I'm so sorry for the inconvenience. If I could just take a moment of your time, I'd like to verify a few details." He glanced toward Harper as he spoke. Her posture stiffened. "I've already initiated protocol." "I understand," Jared said carefully, not looking at her again. "But I've just received a message from operations." A call came in from Highline Air's executive desk. "They're requesting to speak with Mr. Coleman directly. They asked for verification before routing the call through." Harper blinked. Highline, Jared nodded. They said it was urgent, CEO-level authorization. Isaiah shifted Noah slightly and accepted the tablet Jared handed him. A secure call window popped up. He tapped accept. Caleb's voice came through, crisp and low. "I'm on a recorded line with Aurora Skyways Executive Control," Caleb said. "I've pulled flight logs, staff assignments, and passenger records. I've already spoken with Zurich's incoming security team. You will not be detained. That report will disappear." Isaiah didn't speak. He just listened, letting his brother's control wash over him like calm water, extinguishing smoke. "I'm also contacting Aurora's CEO directly." Caleb continued. "Expect a formal apology within 24 hours, and Isaiah record everything from here on out." Isaiah nodded. "Got it." The call ended. He handed the tablet back to Jared. Harper was pale now, standing frozen. "Mr. Coleman," Jared said gently, "may I relocate you to a different seat for your comfort?" Isaiah looked at Elena, who smiled and nodded. He stood slowly, adjusting Noah with practiced ease, where he asked, "Business class." 3A. Harper inhaled sharply. "That seat is reserved." Jared turned to her, expression finely steel. "Not anymore." Isaiah didn't gloat, didn't smirk, didn't even look at Harper as he passed. He simply walked forward, baby against his chest, past the curtain, past the rows that had once seemed unreachable, until he reached his new seat. He sat down, buckled Noah in against him, let his shoulders relax for the first time in hours. A bottle warmed in a cup of water nearby. The steward in business class offered him fruit and tea without asking questions. No raised eyebrows, no false smiles, just dignity. An hour passed, then 2. As Zurich drew closer, Isaiah thought of Ava, thought of her quiet belief in balance, in justice not as punishment, but as restoration. He didn't want anyone fired, but he did want them held accountable. For Noah, for every father who didn't have a brother in a boardroom, for every flight where assumptions turned into policy and policy became prejudice. The intercom clicked. We'll be beginning our descent into Zurich shortly. Please fasten your seat belts. Isaiah pressed a kiss to Noah's head and whispered, "Almost there, little man." And for the first time on that flight, he actually believed it. The first sight of Zurich beneath the plane's wing was a blanket of white and slate gray. Snow clung to the buildings in tight rows, and even from the air, the city seemed to hum with quiet precision. Isaiah watched it unfold through the small oval window of seat 3A. His son, Noah, slept curled against his chest in a kind of peaceful defiance of the storm they had just passed through. The landing came smooth and silent. The wheels kissed the runway, and the plane rolled to a steady halt. A new wave of announcements filled the cabin, but Isaiah wasn't listening. His mind was already preparing, not for customs, not even for the hotel check-in, but for the next conversation. Because even though Caleb had promised him there'd be no security detainment, Isaiah didn't believe in clean endings when messes were swept under rugs. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain said through the intercom, "we'll be deplaning shortly. Passengers continuing on to Athens should remain seated. Zurich-bound guests may now prepare to disembark." Isaiah rose slowly, stretching his legs and carefully placing Noah in the carrier harness across his chest. As he turned to exit, the curtain behind him rustled. Harper Linwood appeared. Her eyes were different now, no longer sharp and defensive, but guarded, measuring. She stepped forward and stopped just short of him. "Mr. Coleman," she said, her voice soft, practiced, "I want to apologize." Isaiah said nothing. She went on. "I realize there were misunderstandings on this flight, and if I added to your discomfort, that was never my intention." Isaiah tilted his head slightly. Discomfort. A flicker of tension passed over her face. "If you'd be open to it, I'd like to offer you a formal statement from Aurora Skyways. The airline will be reaching out." "I don't want a statement," Isaiah said, "and I don't need an apology crafted by a legal team." Her lips parted. "I want awareness," he continued. "I want you to remember what it looks like when your version of professionalism harms someone who didn't come here to fight. I boarded this plane to get my son to Zurich. I didn't sign up for power games." She swallowed hard. "I want you to remember that next time a father asks for a warm bottle, or a man asks for a meal without a corporate smile, or a child cries in a seat you don't think they deserve." His voice never rose. It didn't need to. Harper's eyes dropped. Isaiah stepped past her without another word. At the aircraft door, Jared stood waiting. "I moved your bag up front," he said quietly. "Also, the airline arranged a car service. They didn't tell me why, but I think you know." Isaiah nodded, appreciating the quiet respect. Jared added, "For what it's worth, I'm sorry you had to go through all that, and thank you for the way you handled it." Isaiah offered a gentle smile. "You did good, Jared. Don't lose that." The jet bridge smelled of metal and frost. At the end of it stood a uniformed woman holding a sign that read Coleman. She greeted him in flawless English. "Mr. Coleman, this way, please. The car's ready." He followed her into the terminal, past curious glances and quiet murmurs. Behind him, he heard the click of phone cameras. By the time he reached the waiting black sedan, he already knew the story had broken. As the car slid away from the airport curb, Isaiah's phone buzzed. First a message from Caleb. It's out, and it's everywhere. Then another from a journalist he hadn't spoken to in years. Can we talk about your experience on Aurora Flight 308? Millions are watching. He let out a long, tired breath. His reflection in the window looked older than the morning he'd left New York. Noah stirred. Isaiah rested a hand on his son's chest and whispered, "It's okay, buddy. We're off the plane now." But were they really? Because the plane wasn't just aluminum and aisle lights. The plane was every boardroom that forgot who rode in row 22, every hotel that questioned a black man at check-in, every waiting room where kindness was reserved for those who dressed the part. That evening, Isaiah sat on the bed of his Zurich hotel suite. Noah asleep beside him, while a CNN anchor said his name aloud on live television. Isaiah Coleman, a financial consultant and single father, was the subject of alleged racial discrimination and unjust treatment aboard an Aurora Skyways international flight. Witnesses recorded several incidents involving a senior flight attendant and Mr. Coleman, resulting in a corporate apology, an internal investigation, and social media outrage. Isaiah muted the TV. His phone buzzed again. Caleb. FaceTime. He answered. Caleb appeared, shirt unbuttoned at the collar, his office in the background still lit. "You okay?" he asked immediately. Isaiah nodded. "Tired? But yeah. I just got off a call with Aurora's board." Caleb said, "The CEO's issuing a public apology tomorrow. Harper Linwood's been suspended pending investigation." Isaiah looked down at Noah. "Will it matter?" "It already does," Caleb said. "People are listening, not just to the story, but to the way you carried it. The way you stood your ground without trying to destroy anyone." Isaiah met his brother's gaze. "I didn't want her destroyed." "I know." Caleb smiled faintly. "That's what makes it powerful." There was a long pause. Then Isaiah added, "But if I hadn't called you, if you weren't who you are, I wouldn't be in this hotel right now. I'd probably still be on that plane, filling out an incident report." Caleb's jaw tightened. "I know." Another silence. Then Caleb said, "That's why I'm building something." Isaiah frowned. "Building what program? For passengers like you, who don't have a brother in a corner office." Isaiah blinked. "I've got legal pulling contracts." Caleb continued. "We're creating a travel equity platform, resources, reporting lines, real-time flight advocacy. Every airline we partner with is going to be required to implement it." Isaiah didn't speak. Caleb leaned closer. "You think today was the end of something, but it's just the beginning." Isaiah sat quietly, heart heavy and somehow lighter at once. Then he smiled. Not for the news story, not for the apologies, but for the truth of what Caleb had just said. This was the beginning, and beginnings, real ones, always came with struggle. He looked at his son, hand curled into the blanket, and he knew what he was fighting for. The snow had stopped by morning. Sunlight filtered gently through the wide Zurich hotel windows, and the city below seemed clean and slow-moving, like it was waking up at its own deliberate pace. Isaiah stood barefoot on the carpet, holding a warm bottle for Noah, who lay kicking on the bed, giggling at the bouncing light on the ceiling. It felt like the first moment of peace in 2 days. A moment not shaped by scrutiny, apology, or policy, just father and son. He breathed it in, then came the knock. Isaiah opened the door to find a young woman in a dark blazer standing in the hallway. She held a tablet and wore a lanyard with the Aurora Skyways crest. Behind her stood a cameraman, his equipment already powered up. "Mr. Coleman," she asked. "I'm Amelia Shore, Public Relations. The CEO has authorized us to record a formal statement and apology. May we come in?" Isaiah stared at them for a long second. "You want to film it here? It's company protocol for transparency." Isaiah glanced at Noah, who'd started fussing. "I'm not interested in a production," he said. "Not if this is about optics." "It's not," Amelia replied quickly. "It's about acknowledgement." Isaiah didn't move. He thought of Ava again, her voice soft and patient, coming back to him from some quiet hallway in his mind. "Don't speak until you know what you need to say." "All right," he said, "but no lights, no scripts, no edits." Amelia nodded. "Understood." They entered quietly. The cameraman set up near the window, framing Isaiah in soft light with Noah perched on his lap. Amelia began recording. "Today, we're speaking with Isaiah Coleman, whose recent experience on Aurora Flight 308 has sparked global conversation about bias, dignity, and the role of customer care in modern travel." Isaiah held his son close and began to speak. "I didn't plan to be a headline," he said. "I planned to be a dad on a long-haul flight trying to get his baby to his grandfather's birthday." He paused. "I've been stopped before, profiled, ignored, but this was the first time it happened while my child was in my arms." Noah reached for his face, and Isaiah smiled gently. "I watched a flight attendant assess me before I spoke. I watched her deny my son food. I watched her ask me to sign a misconduct form for asking for milk. I wasn't loud, I wasn't aggressive, but I was judged." The room fell still. He went on. "This story's viral now. People are calling it brave, but bravery isn't the word I'd use. Exhaustion might be closer, because every time someone like me is forced to prove their innocence for simply existing, we lose a little more of our humanity in the eyes of others." Amelia's throat bobbed. She glanced down, fingers tight around her tablet. Isaiah continued. "My son will grow up watching this, hearing it. He'll see me not raise my voice, not throw blame, but still speak the truth, because I want him to know that dignity isn't silence, and grace isn't weakness." He paused again. "And I want him to know that love fights back, not with fists, but with clarity." The camera shut off. The silence afterward was heavier than the snow outside. Amelia stood and extended a small envelope. "This is a written apology from the CEO, also a private offer of restitution." Isaiah accepted it, but didn't open it. "Tell him I'd rather see a policy change than a payout." "You'll get both," she said quietly. After they left, Isaiah sat in the quiet again. Then his phone lit up. A video was trending. Someone from Economy had filmed Elena standing up for him during the flight. Her words had struck deep. The clip now had 4.7 million views. The caption read, "This woman defended a stranger when no one else would. Be like Elena." Isaiah watched the clip again. The way she stood, the calm fury in her voice. He texted her, "Isaiah, just saw the video. You spoke truth. Thank you. Elena, I only did what anyone decent should do. I'm glad you're safe. If you ever need a travel buddy for your next flight, I'm one call away." He smiled. An hour later, a new notification popped up. Aurora Skyways had just announced a partnership with Highline Air, a joint initiative called the Passenger Dignity Alliance. Isaiah opened the press release. Words jumped out at him. Real-time passenger support, anti-bias training across staff levels, emergency escalation channels, anonymous travel equity hotline. The story had become movement, and the movement had momentum. He turned to Noah. "Your uncle doesn't waste time." Noah babbled in reply. That afternoon, Isaiah took a walk through Zurich's old town. Snow crunched beneath his boots as he pushed the stroller between narrow streets and quiet cafes. Locals passed him without curiosity, without judgment, just a man and his son. He stopped beside a park bench and sat down, opened his journal, let the ink bleed his thoughts onto the page. Not about Harper, not about Jared or Davidson, but about Grace. And how sometimes the most radical act of resistance was to remain whole when the world tried to chip you away piece by piece. He closed the notebook, watched the snow start to fall again, and knew the next chapter wasn't about what had happened on the plane. It was about what he'd choose to do with it. Zurich faded into the rearview mirror as Isaiah and Noah boarded their return flight to New York. It wasn't the same airline. Caleb made sure of that. This time, they were flying with Highline Air, and the difference was evident from the moment they stepped into the terminal. There was no suspicious glance at the bottle bag, no second look at the boarding pass, no request for identification 3 times in a row. Just a warm smile from the gate agent and a gentle, "Welcome aboard, Mr. Coleman." Isaiah hadn't planned to feel nervous, but as they settled into their seats this time, 2A and 2B, his shoulders remained tight. His body remembered what had happened, not just on the Aurora flight, but on countless flights before. It would take time to unwind the tension that years of subtle dismissal had taught his muscles to hold. But this time, when a flight attendant approached, she knelt to Noah's eye level and said, "Hey there, big guy. Can I bring you a warm bottle or anything for Dad?" Isaiah exhaled, not just from relief, but from something deeper, from knowing that perhaps the wave he started hadn't ended in that viral moment. Perhaps it was still moving. The woman introduced herself as Sienna Brooks. She wore her name tag proudly but spoke without performance. Just calm presence. "I read about you," she said softly once Noah drifted to sleep. "I was at a conference last week where your name came up 3 times. Every speaker started with what happened on Aurora 308. Isaiah smiled gently, unsure how to respond. Sienna continued, "I've been flying for 12 years, and I've seen things that never made it to the news. You said what so many of us wanted to say, but couldn't, because we'd lose our jobs, or worse, be labeled difficult." Isaiah looked out the window, then back at her. "I didn't say anything new." "No," she replied, "but you said it out loud. And with grace, that's the difference." Later, as the flight cruised over the Atlantic, Isaiah opened the folder Caleb had sent him the night before. Inside was a draft of the Passenger Dignity Alliance Charter. He'd been asked to give feedback, not as a consultant, not even as a passenger, but as a co-author. The document began. Travel is not a privilege granted by appearance or pedigree. It is a human act, to move, to connect, to belong. Any system that denies that right through silence or assumption must be transformed. Isaiah read every word, then read it again. He jotted down notes, made edits, added a section on family travel and the racialized lens applied to black fathers. He included a paragraph about infant needs and how bias and perception often led to assumptions about neglect or incompetence. He included one line that stayed with him even after he closed the folder. Dignity doesn't require uniformity, it requires humility. As they began their descent, Sienna returned. "Mr. Coleman, there's a gentleman seated in 5C who asked to speak with you if you're open to it. He said he was on flight 308, 2 rows behind you." Isaiah hesitated. "Did he give his name?" "He said you'd recognize his voice." Isaiah nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll meet him." He stood, gently unstrapped Noah from his harness, and walked toward the middle of the cabin. There sat Mr. John Davidson. He rose before Isaiah could say a word. "I owe you a conversation," Davidson said. Isaiah's body tensed slightly, but he nodded. They stepped into the open space near the galley. "I didn't speak up," Davidson said. "I should have. I saw what was happening, and I stayed in my seat." Isaiah didn't speak. Davidson continued. "You looked like you had it handled. Calm. Controlled. I told myself that was enough reason to stay quiet, but it wasn't. I wasn't looking for backup," Isaiah said. "I know, but you shouldn't have had to do it alone. That's the part that sits heavy." There was a pause. Then Isaiah said, "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I saw what you did with it. You could have lit the whole thing on fire. You didn't. You asked for change instead of vengeance. That's rare. And honestly, it made me look at myself. How many times I let things slide because they weren't happening to me." Isaiah searched his face. Davidson's words felt unpolished, but real. "I didn't do it for that," Isaiah said. "I did it so the next black father doesn't have to explain his child's hunger as a security risk." Davidson nodded. "Still, it worked, on me." They shook hands, not as a resolution, but a gesture, a bridge. Back in his seat, Isaiah felt a warmth he hadn't expected. Not forgiveness, but a loosening of something. After landing, Sienna handed him a note folded in half. It read, "If this world had more fathers like you, and more people who listened like you made us all listen, I'd still believe in it even when it doesn't believe in me." Sienna, he tucked it into his coat pocket. Outside, the air at JFK was brisk, a familiar chill. A man from Highline Air greeted him curbside. "Mr. Coleman, your ride's waiting. Also, Mr. Caleb asked me to remind you board meeting next week. He says your voice will shape the new training protocol." Isaiah buckled Noah into the car seat, hands steady. Before closing the door, he looked up at the sky. Same sky, same man, but not the same silence. He was no longer just a passenger. He was a page in the manual, a voice in the policy room, a new seat at the table. Isaiah Coleman didn't sleep that night. Even back in the comfort of his apartment in Brooklyn, the hum of home didn't calm his thoughts like it used to. The white noise machine in Noah's nursery was on. The hallway light glowed just enough to let him see the framed photos of Ava laughing in the kitchen, feeding Noah his first spoon of oatmeal, wrapped in her favorite blue shawl by the fire pit. He sat in the living room with a mug of cold tea and his journal open on the coffee table. A single sentence kept coming to him, over and over. "I didn't know I could be this tired and this awake at the same time." He wasn't physically exhausted. It was something else, a kind of deep unraveling, the kind that happens when the thing you've carried alone for years is finally named out loud, when the burden is no longer just yours, but the world's, and the world, suddenly, is listening. The news cycle hadn't let go, Commentators were still debating, advocates were organizing, hashtags like "Fly with Dignity" and "Oz Travel While Black" continued trending. But Isaiah knew what the headlines didn't. This wasn't just about one flight, one seat, or even one airline. This was about how systems taught people to expect harm or to be silent in the face of it, and how sometimes it took a child's hunger to break that silence. Noah stirred. Isaiah went to him, rubbed his back gently, then stayed a moment, just watching his son breathe. That little chest rising and falling, so unaware of the storm he'd quietly survived. Isaiah whispered, "You won't remember this, but I will, and that's enough." The next morning, he dropped Noah off at his sister-in-law Tasha's place. Caleb had arranged for a driver, a black SUV with tinted windows and a driver who greeted him with a respectful, "Mr. Coleman." Isaiah smiled lightly. "That's still weird to hear." The driver chuckled. "Well, sir, I'm guessing you'll get used to it real soon." The meeting was being held at Highline Air's Manhattan headquarters, an ultra-modern glass building nestled between steel giants on West 57th Street. Isaiah had never seen the inside. He knew Caleb worked here, knew he led the board from the top floor, but it had always felt like another world, shiny, efficient, unreachable. Today, he had a key card with his name on it. He stepped into the elevator, smoothed his shirt collar, and took a long breath. The 49th floor opened to a sweeping view of the city skyline. Behind a glass door, the boardroom buzzed with light conversation, laptops, and filtered coffee. Isaiah stepped inside. Caleb rose immediately. There he is. The room quieted, every head turned. A tall white woman in a gray suit stood and extended her hand. "Mr. Coleman, I'm Dana Fielding, head of operations. On behalf of our entire board, thank you for being here." Isaiah nodded and shook her hand. "Thank you for inviting me." "Not inviting." Caleb cut in, smiling, "Recruiting." They laughed, but Isaiah's heart was steady. He wasn't here to charm them, he was here to change something. Over the next 2 hours, the meeting unfolded with purpose. They reviewed the new Passenger Dignity Alliance charter. They discussed training protocols, accountability audits, third-party bias review boards, and the rollout of a real-time support app for in-flight discrimination reports. Isaiah spoke carefully, but with clarity. "I don't want apologies. I want structures, built-in protections. And not just for black passengers, though that's where we must start, but for single mothers, disabled travelers, elderly folks who get dismissed the second they speak slowly. We've all flown while feeling invisible. That's what needs to end." At one point, someone mentioned legal risk, how pushing too hard could spark backlash or false claims. Isaiah looked around the table. "The real risk," he said, "is doing nothing until someone bleeds or breaks." The room went quiet again, but it wasn't discomfort. It was agreement. When the meeting ended, Dana stopped him at the elevator. "Mr. Coleman," she said, "I just wanted to say, I flew solo with my twins last summer. First time ever. Nobody looked at me twice. Nobody asked if I knew what I was doing. I took that for granted." Isaiah gave a soft smile. "You shouldn't have to question that, but you also shouldn't forget it." She nodded. "You've changed how I see that now. Thank you." He rode down to the street level in silence, passing through the lobby where a new poster had gone up. It read, "Every seat, every voice, every flight. Dignity takes off with us." That night, while feeding Noah mashed banana in his high chair, Isaiah got a call. It was Jared Kwan. Isaiah answered. Surprised, Jared. Hey, man, I hope it's okay. I reached out. I got your number through HR. They're still doing the internal review. Isaiah stood at the kitchen counter, Noah kicking his feet behind him. Of course, he said, you holding up Jared's side. It's been a lot. I gave a full statement. HR asked me if I felt pressured by anyone to support your side. Isaiah frowned. Did you? No, Jared replied quickly, but that question tells you something, doesn't it? They're still worried about optics, not truth. Isaiah leaned against the counter. They'll get there, or they'll be replaced by people who will. There was a pause. I wanted to thank you, Jared said, for not naming me, for not dragging me into the storm. You were the only one who offered kindness on that plane. You did the right thing when it mattered. I didn't forget that. Jared's voice cracked slightly. You shouldn't have had to be brave that day. You should have just been a dad on a flight. Isaiah looked at Noah and whispered, That's the dream. They said goodbye, and Isaiah sat down on the floor beside Noah. He didn't feel victorious. He felt grounded. The fight wasn't over, but something had shifted, and not just in boardrooms or headlines, in people, in the small spaces where silence used to win. And as Noah reached for his hand with sticky fingers and a toothless grin, Isaiah knew one thing for sure: tomorrow they'd fly again, and the sky would remember. Isaiah didn't expect the invitation to come from Elena Cruz. Her email came late on a Tuesday evening, simple and elegant, just like the woman herself. Dear Isaiah, we met once in the sky, but I believe we were meant to cross paths again. I host a small radio segment on WNYC called People You Should Know. It airs Sundays. I'd be honored if you'd join me for a live conversation this week. You've said much with restraint. Perhaps now is the time to say it aloud. With respect. Elena. Isaiah read it twice, then again. He hadn't done interviews. He hadn't posted anything beyond the statement Caleb had helped him write for the press. In a world hungry for drama, he'd chosen dignity. But this felt different. Elena wasn't asking for a spectacle. She was offering a space. That Friday, he stepped into the studio. It was smaller than he'd imagined. Soft yellow lights, an old wooden table, microphones worn at the edge, a coffee cup with lipstick marks. It felt less like a radio station and more like a friend's kitchen. Elena greeted him with the same warmth as she had on the flight, her silver hair pinned back with a mother-of-pearl clip. Her eyes as kind as ever. I'm glad you came, she said, motioning to the seat across from her. No pressure, Isaiah. We're just gonna talk. The red light went on. The producer gave them a thumbs up, and Elena began. Listeners, welcome back to People You Should Know. Today, I'm joined by Isaiah Coleman, a father whose quiet courage aboard a now infamous flight sparked a national reckoning in the airline industry. But this isn't a story about scandal. It's a story about fatherhood, perception, and the difference between seeing and understanding. Isaiah took a breath. Thank you for having me, Elena. I'm still getting used to being someone people want to know. She chuckled softly. Tell us what you remember most about that day. Isaiah stared at the microphone, then past it. It wasn't the confrontation, not even the moment I called my brother. What I remember most was Noah's cry, that sharp little sound he makes when he's hungry and confused, and the way I froze not because I didn't know what to do, but because I knew exactly what was about to happen. "What do you mean?" Elena asked. "I mean, I've been in that seat before, not just on airplanes but in restaurants, banks, parent-teacher meetings, places where people look at a black man with a baby and decide he must have made a mistake." There was a long pause, no music, no transitions, just silence that made room. Elena said gently, "What did that moment teach you?" Isaiah thought for a second. "That dignity is fragile, not because it's weak, but because it depends on how others choose to treat you. And I realized I'd spent years preparing to protect mine without ever demanding it outright." He glanced at her. "I think that's the trap. We get so good at swallowing microaggressions that we forget we can spit them out." The board lit up with caller requests, but Elena held them off. "Isaiah," she asked, "if you could say one thing to every airline employee in the country, what would it be?" He leaned in. "Don't assume silence means comfort, and don't confuse your uniform for authority over someone's humanity." The line stayed open for a few seconds longer, but Elena ended the segment there, with a nod and a soft, "Let's leave the rest in people's hearts." After the show, they walked out together into the chill of late afternoon. "You changed something today," she said. Isaiah shook his head. "I think people were already ready to hear it. I just happened to be the one holding the mic." That night, his inbox flooded. Letters, stories, voices that had waited for someone else to speak first. A single father in Ohio who'd been mistaken for a kidnapper in a mall. A black mother in Oregon whose son was frisked at an airport because he had too many electronics. A biracial woman who was asked twice if she was sure her baby was hers, and between the lines of every message was the same quiet plea. "Please tell me I'm not alone." Isaiah replied to everyone he could, not with long speeches, just a line, a sentence, something true. "You're not alone, and sometimes you shouldn't have had to carry that alone." The next day, Caleb called him. "You're going viral again," his brother said. "The WNYC clip hit 4 million views. Some of it's hard to watch, there's backlash, but it's mostly love. Isaiah, you should see what it's doing inside the company. People are actually listening." Isaiah rubbed his temple. "That's good. I think—" Caleb chuckled. "You okay?" "I'm tired." Isaiah said, "Not bad tired. Just like something big's ending and something bigger's about to begin." His brother was quiet for a moment. "You know what Mom used to say?" Caleb finally replied. "When it gets too loud outside, it means something quiet inside is trying to speak." Isaiah smiled. Yeah, she was right. Later that week, he was invited to attend a special roundtable hosted by the Department of Transportation. The topic, equity and passenger experience. He brought Noah, tucked in a chest carrier with a pacifier and 2 backup bottles. When he walked into the marble atrium where the panel was being held, every eye turned. Not in suspicion, in welcome. He was no longer just a passenger. He was a witness, a builder, a new compass for an industry that had lost its way. And when one of the coordinators leaned over and whispered, "Sir, the secretary would like to meet you after." Isaiah didn't flinch. He nodded calmly and gently adjusted the sleeping weight of his son. His story had once been taken from him, shaped by others, filtered by assumptions. Now, he was telling it himself, and every time he did, another silence broke. The room was warmer than expected, not physically, but emotionally. Isaiah sat at the long table in Washington, D.C.'s Department of Transportation Conference Center. Noah bundled against his chest in a soft Navy carrier. Around him sat CEOs, federal officials, advocacy leaders, and airline veterans with decades of flight time. They were here to talk about equity, but for the first time, it didn't feel like just talk. The moderator, a calm-voiced woman named Patrice Dorsey, turned to Isaiah as she adjusted her microphone. "Mr. Coleman," she began, "I know you've been asked to relive the events of Flight 227 more times than you'd like, but I'm wondering if today you'd share not what happened, but how it felt." Isaiah looked down at his son, then slowly raised his gaze to the room. It felt familiar. He said, "Not the plain part, the judgment, the quick conclusions, the assumption that I must have done something wrong. That feeling didn't start at 30,000 feet. There were nods around the table, some quiet throat clearing, a few people folding their hands a little tighter." He continued, "But what made that moment different, what made it stick, was that this time, someone watched. Then someone spoke. Then someone listened. That chain doesn't happen often. Usually, we just swallow it and move on. This time, we didn't." Patrice leaned in. "Why do you think people responded to your story the way they did?" Isaiah paused. "Because people are tired of pretending this kind of thing doesn't happen. We all know someone who's been humiliated in silence. We've all been taught to endure it, especially if you're black, brown, poor, single, or just not what someone expects in a first-class seat." He looked around, so when it was finally visible, undeniable, it cracked something open. Patrice nodded, "Thank you." From there, the conversation shifted into policy. Caleb spoke next, detailing Highline Air's new training protocols. Sienna Brooks, who had also joined, shared her experience as a flight attendant, learning to unlearn subconscious bias, and how she now trains a junior crews with lived examples. Dana Fielding offered updates on their Dignity in Flight app, which was already in soft launch at select terminals. But what struck Isaiah most was what happened during the lunch break. Not the speeches, the side conversations. A young pilot pulled him aside near the coffee cart. "I've got 2 mixed-race kids," he said quietly, "and I used to think I was doing enough by just not being part of the problem. Now I know that's not enough." A Latina airport janitor, invited as part of the labor union's delegation, came up with tears in her eyes. "I clean first class every night. You'd be shocked at how people leave their respect behind with their trash. What you did, it changed something for all of us." And a white woman in a Navy power suit, someone Isaiah remembered from a PR statement back in April, leaned in and whispered, "I used to flinch when people talked about race in training. I thought I was being accused of something. Now I realize I was just being invited to see more clearly." Isaiah didn't say much to any of them, just nodded, let them speak, let their words settle. Because sometimes the power wasn't in what he said, it was in what he refused to carry alone anymore. That evening, as he and Noah returned to their hotel room, he caught the news segment airing footage from the summit. The caption read, "Father behind, viral flight, incident leads industry reform conversation in D.C." Isaiah muted the sound, watched himself, holding Noah, surrounded by decision-makers. It looked surreal, like a dream he never knew he had. He didn't see a hero. He saw a man who chose not to walk away when the world expected him to. Later that week, he received a letter from someone unexpected, handwritten, on thick ivory stationery, signed Elijah Ross, President, United Pilots Federation. Isaiah sat at the kitchen table, turning it over with cautious hands. The note was short. "Mr. Coleman, though we've never met, your story made it to every cockpit in the country. I want you to know that many of us, too many, have been silent for too long, but not anymore. My daughter asked me last week why I let things happen if I know they're wrong. I told her I wouldn't anymore, because of you. With respect, E." Ross Isaiah folded the letter and placed it on his bookshelf, right next to the photo of Ava holding newborn Noah, her eyes tired but laughing. He whispered aloud, "We're not flying alone anymore, babe." The next day, a call came from Caleb. "You ready for this?" his brother asked. "For what?" Caleb hesitated, then smiled through the phone. "They're naming the new policy suite after you." Isaiah froze. "What?" "Yeah. The Isaiah Coleman Passenger Dignity Protocol. It's official. It'll be integrated into every flight crew orientation starting next month." Isaiah blinked. "That's a lot." "I know," Caleb said gently, "but you earned it." Isaiah sat down slowly. He thought about every moment on that flight, the tension in his chest when Harper Linwood approached, the way Jared had looked at him, half apology, half helplessness. Elena's soft defiance when she chose to sit by him, his own shaken hands as he dialed Caleb's number. He never wanted his name in lights. He just wanted Noah to grow up in a world where his cries didn't trigger suspicion, where a black man cradling his child didn't have to prove he was safe to sit. And now, maybe, just maybe, that world was beginning. Later that night, he sat by Noah's crib. The boy was dreaming, twitching gently, lips puckering in tiny sighs. Isaiah spoke aloud, like a lullaby no one else could hear. "Your name isn't on any policy, but you're the reason for all of them." And the room, quiet and steady, held his voice like something sacred. The ceremony wasn't grand. It wasn't held in a gilded ballroom or at some high-rise press conference. It took place at Gate 28C of Highline Terminal in Atlanta, tucked between a quiet bookstore and a sandwich kiosk. But that gate had been chosen for a reason. It was the very gate where Flight 227 had first boarded. The crowd was quiet. Mostly airline employees in crisp uniforms, a few officials from the Department of Transportation, and a handful of passengers who had once spoken up, stepped in, or simply borne witness. At the center of it all stood Isaiah, holding Noah in his arms. The child, now 9 months old and dressed in a navy onesie with little airplanes across the front. The new policy placard gleamed on the wall beside them. The Isaiah Coleman Passenger Dignity Protocol effective immediately. Nationwide implementation in progress. Caleb took the small podium first. He wasn't wearing a CEO's suit, just a charcoal gray sweater, jeans, and worn sneakers that made him look more like the big brother Isaiah remembered from their childhood. Not the executive everyone else saw. "Today isn't about corporate pride," Caleb said, his voice steady but soft. "It's about admitting we didn't listen fast enough, and about a man who made sure we couldn't ignore what mattered any longer." He turned, eyes locking with his brother's. "It's about Isaiah." There was a moment of stillness, not applause, not speeches, just presence. Then Elena Cruz stepped forward, her silver hair pinned back, her voice as steady as it had been that day in the air. "I've flown more miles than I can count, seen the best and worst of people in metal tubes soaring above the clouds. But I've rarely seen the kind of grace Isaiah showed under pressure, under fire. While holding a baby and swallowing pride most of us can't imagine carrying." She turned to the placard, pressed her hand to it with reverence. This is not a monument, it's a reminder. And reminders, she added gently, are what keep us human. Afterward, people came to shake Isaiah's hand. Some simply placed their palms on his shoulder or nodded silently. Among them were flight attendants from other airlines, veterans with decades of service, new hires only weeks into training. One young woman, tears in her eyes, whispered, "Thank you for being the voice I was scared to have." Isaiah didn't say much. He didn't need to. His silence had always said enough. That night, back at the hotel, Noah crawled for the first time. It was a slow, uneven, wobbly crawl across the hotel carpet, full of determination and unexpected grace. Isaiah watched, heart full, arms stretched open, tears he didn't try to hide. "You did it, kid," he whispered, scooping him up. "You moved forward." 3 days later, a letter arrived from Harper Linwood. Isaiah opened it slowly, unsure what to expect. It was handwritten, unadorned, on plain cream paper. "Mr. Coleman, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect understanding. But I need you to know that I've resigned from Aurora Skyways. I've begun working with an organization focused on racial literacy and empathy training for frontline service workers. It's a start. That day, I saw you through fear instead of clarity, and I've lived every moment since trying to learn why. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. Truly." Harper Linwood, Isaiah, read the letter 3 times, then placed it in a drawer not to forget, but to remember that even wrongdoers could seek growth. Forgiveness didn't always come loudly. Sometimes it came as a quiet decision not to carry someone else's hate inside your chest. Weeks passed, news cycles moved on, but the effects remained. Airlines began retraining flight crews with real-life scenarios and testimonial-based workshops. The Coleman Protocol was featured in national education campaigns. Schools used the story in diversity units. Churches mentioned Isaiah's story in sermons about empathy. And regular people, started to see things they'd ignored before. A black father soothing his baby at a gate, no longer side-eyed. A flight attendant checking herself before judging a passenger's tone, practicing pause instead of power. Even the once cynical Mr. John Davidson, now quietly retired, wrote an op-ed titled, "When You Think You Know Who Belongs in First Class." Isaiah read it. It was imperfect, but honest. And honesty, he had learned, was often the beginning of change. One morning, as he walked with Noah through the terminal on their way to visit Ava's parents, something extraordinary happened. A flight attendant, young, red-haired, nervous, approached him near gate 11B. "Excuse me, Mr. Coleman." Isaiah turned, gently bouncing Noah. "Yes." She smiled timidly, holding out a small badge. "I'm graduating today. First day on the job, and they had us watch your story in training. I wanted to say thank you." Isaiah looked at the badge. Her name was Camille, her uniform still creased with excitement. He reached out and shook her hand. "Fly safe, Camille, and fly fair." As they boarded the plane, Isaiah noticed the plaque near the cockpit door. "We see you. We hear you. You belong here. The Coleman Protocol." He took his seat. Noah, now wide-eyed and babbling, and felt something he hadn't felt since Ava passed. Peace. Not because everything was fixed, but because enough people had finally chosen to care. When the wheels lifted off and the clouds melted beneath the cabin, Isaiah closed his eyes and whispered a promise: "No one flies alone anymore. Not if I can help it." And for the first time in a long time, the sky didn't feel so far away. It felt like home. What began as a humiliating flight ended as a nationwide reckoning. Isaiah Coleman didn't raise his voice. He didn't demand headlines. He simply held his child and held his ground. And in doing so, he reminded us all that dignity doesn't come from a uniform or a corporate script. It comes from how we choose to see each other, especially when no one's watching. His story isn't just about race or flying. It's about every moment we assume instead of asking, judge instead of listening, exclude instead of embracing. To those who've ever felt unwelcome in a place they paid to be, this story is for you. And to those who've stayed silent in the face of prejudice, let this be your turning point, because silence keeps us grounded. But truth lets us soar. If this story moved you, please like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more real stories that expose injustice, celebrate courage, and remind us that we're all in this sky together. We'll see you in the next video. And remember, no one should fly alone.